Some people notice beauty. Some notice success. He noticed the thing I was trying hardest to hide. The ballroom sparkled beneath 1,000 crystal lights, each one reflecting off polished marble and expensive champagne glasses. Everything about the charity gala screamed wealth. Designer dresses, tailored suits, people who never checked price tags and never worried about overdue bills. Then there was me, Grace Bennett, 27 years old, running on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee. I adjusted a tray of sparkling water and moved through the crowd with the practiced smile I wore at every event. Smile, nod, keep moving. That was the job. The catering company paid well enough, and well enough was all I needed these days. Rent in Queens was due next week. The electric bill sat unopened on my kitchen counter. Life had become a series of numbers and obligations. Survive this month, then survive the next one. The string quartet played softly near the stage. Conversations floated through the room like background music. Nobody noticed the servers. That was normal. We were part of the furniture. Useful, but invisible. I actually preferred it that way. Invisible people did not get asked questions. Invisible people did not have to explain themselves. A guest reached for a glass from my tray. I smiled politely and kept walking. Halfway across the ballroom, I caught sight of him. Luca Moretti. Everyone knew who he was. Some people called him a businessman. Others called him something else when they thought nobody could hear. Whatever the truth was, one thing remained certain. When Luca Moretti entered a room, the room noticed. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Nearly 6'4", dark suit, dark hair, calm expression. Around him stood executives, politicians, and investors. Yet somehow he seemed separate from all of them, like he was observing rather than participating. I lowered my eyes immediately and continued walking. Men like Luca Moretti existed in a different universe from women like me. Our paths were not supposed to cross. 10 minutes later, I was replacing empty glasses near the dessert table when one of the event coordinators called my name. Grace, can you help near the west entrance? Of course. I turned quickly. The edge of my sleeve caught on a decorative display. The fabric shifted just enough to expose part of my wrist before I pulled it back down. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Nobody should have noticed. Nobody except Luca Moretti. I felt it before I saw it. That strange sensation of being watched. My eyes lifted across the room. He was looking directly at me. Not at my face. Not at the tray. At my wrist. My stomach tightened instantly. I adjusted my sleeve. The expression on his face never changed. But something in his eyes did. The conversation around him continued. People laughed. Someone raised a toast. Yet Lucas seemed to hear none of it. For several seconds, he simply watched. Studied. Observed. Then one of his associates said something that finally pulled his attention away. I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. The feeling passed. Or so I thought. An hour later, the gala was still in full swing when a man in a dark suit approached me near the service station. Miss Bennett. I looked up. Yes. Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. My heart skipped. Me? The man nodded once. Immediately, I stared past him toward the far side of the ballroom, where Luca Moretti stood waiting. And suddenly, I had the uncomfortable feeling that my carefully hidden secrets were no longer hidden at all. The elevator ride to the top floor felt much longer than it actually was. 20 seconds. Maybe 30. Long enough for my imagination to create 100 different reasons why Luca Moretti wanted to see me. None of them were good. I stood beside the man who had delivered the message and watched the floor numbers climb higher and higher. My hands remained steady. Years of customer service had taught me how to look calm, even when I was not. Inside, however, my stomach twisted into knots. The elevator doors opened onto a private floor that looked more like a luxury penthouse than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Manhattan skyline, glowing beneath the night sky. Soft lighting reflected off polished wood floors. Everything felt expensive, controlled, quiet. The man led me down a hallway and stopped in front of a large office. Go in. I hesitated. Am I in trouble? His expression softened slightly. No, Miss Bennett. He opened the door. Quite the opposite. That answer only made me more nervous. I stepped inside. Luca Moretti stood near the windows with his back turned. One hand rested in his pocket while the other held a glass of sparkling water. The city stretched behind him like a sea of lights. He looked over his shoulder when he heard the door close. His gaze settled on me immediately. Calm. Focused. Impossible to read. Sit. His voice was deep and quiet. Not a request. Not exactly an order either. I obeyed before I could stop myself. He walked toward the desk and pressed a button beside the door. A soft click echoed through the room. My eyes shifted toward the entrance. The lock had engaged. My heart stumbled. Luca noticed. Nobody will interrupt us now. His tone remained completely calm. That is all. I nodded slowly, though the explanation did little to ease my nerves. He sat across from me and folded his hands. Silence filled the office. Not uncomfortable silence. Deliberate silence. The kind that made people reveal things without realizing it. I looked away first. Toward the skyline. Toward anything except those observant blue eyes. Do you know why you are here? He asked. No. Good. The answer surprised me. Lucas studied me for several seconds. Not my face. Not my clothes. The sleeve covering my wrist. Suddenly I understood. My pulse quickened. I resisted the urge to adjust the fabric again. Grace. Hearing my name in his voice felt strange. Personal somehow. Look at me. I did. He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressively. Not threateningly. Just enough to make it clear he wanted the truth. Who hurt you? The question landed like a stone in still water. Every sound seemed to disappear. The city outside. The music from the gala below. Even my own breathing. For a moment, I simply stared at him. Then I laughed softly. A nervous reaction. Nobody. Luca did not blink. That is not true. You do not know me. No. His voice remained steady. But I know what I saw. My throat tightened. Instinct told me to leave. To smile. To make an excuse. To end the conversation before it reached dangerous territory. Because the moment someone starts asking the right questions, all the carefully built walls begin to crack. Luca remained silent. Waiting. Patient. Certain. And for the first time in a very long time, I found myself sitting across from someone who was not willing to accept the lie I had been telling everyone, including myself. The truth is, people only stop asking questions when you become good at lying. I had spent years perfecting that skill. So when Luca Moretti looked directly at me and refused to believe my answer, panic settled into my chest. Not because he frightened me, because he saw too much. I forced a smile. The same smile I used with difficult customers and curious neighbors. The same smile that usually ended uncomfortable conversations. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully. But you are mistaken. Luca remained perfectly still. Am I? I nodded. Yes. Silence followed. He did not argue. He did not challenge me. Somehow that made everything worse. Most people wanted explanations. Luca seemed content to simply wait. The city lights reflected in the windows behind him. The gala continued several floors below. Yet inside that office, time felt strangely suspended. You should go back to your guests, I said. And you should tell me the truth. My smile disappeared. He spoke so calmly, so confidently, as though the answer already existed, and he was simply waiting for me to catch up. I stood from my chair. I think this conversation is over. Luca glanced toward the door, then back at me. If you want to leave, leave. The response caught me off guard. I expected resistance, questions, pressure. Instead, he simply sat there, watching. I reached for the door handle. My fingers touched the metal, then stopped. Because deep down, I knew the problem was not the locked door. The problem was that part of me wanted someone to keep asking. Someone to notice. Someone to care enough not to accept the easy answer. I hated that feeling. It made me vulnerable. It made me angry. I turned around. Luca had not moved. Why do you care? The question escaped before I could stop it. His expression softened slightly. Not much. Just enough to notice. Because somebody should. My throat tightened. I looked away immediately. The answer was too simple. Too honest. You do not know anything about me. No, he asked quietly. You work 6 days a week. My eyes widened. You arrive early. You leave late. You rarely speak about yourself. You always help the other staff when they are overwhelmed. I stared at him. How do you know that? I pay attention. For simple words. Yet they landed harder than anything else he had said. Nobody paid attention. Not really. Most people were too busy with their own lives. Their own problems. Their own priorities. But Luca was describing details even some of my coworkers never noticed. He leaned forward slightly. Grace. People do not become this guarded for no reason. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. To protect myself. To end the conversation before it reached the places I spent years avoiding. But another feeling was beginning to grow beneath the fear. Exhaustion. Pure exhaustion. I was tired of pretending everything was fine. Tired of carrying every burden alone. Tired of believing that asking for help made me weak. Lucas seemed to recognize the battle happening behind my eyes. He did not push. He did not demand answers. He simply said, "You do not have to tell me today." My gaze lifted to his. "Then why ask?" For the first time, a faint sadness crossed his face. Because if nobody asks, people start believing they deserve whatever they are enduring. And for a moment, I could not breathe. Because somewhere deep inside, I realized that was exactly what had happened to me. The drive home that night felt different. The city looked the same. Yellow taxis, crowded sidewalks, neon signs glowing in puddles left behind by an afternoon rainstorm. Yet something had changed. Luca Moretti had asked a question nobody else seemed willing to ask. More importantly, he had waited for the answer. I stared out the window of the bus and watched Manhattan disappear behind me. His words repeated themselves inside my head. If nobody asks, people start believing they deserve whatever they are enduring. I hated how accurate that sounded. By the time I reached my apartment building in Queens, it was nearly midnight. The hallway lights flickered the way they always did. The elevator still made strange noises. Everything familiar. Everything ordinary. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. A pile of unopened mail waited on the kitchen counter. Utility bills. Credit card statements. Reminders of responsibilities that never seemed to end. I dropped my bag beside the couch and sank into the silence. For a few minutes, I simply sat there staring at nothing. Then my phone buzzed. My stomach tightened instantly. The message was short. "Where were you tonight?" No greeting. No explanation. Just a question that somehow felt heavier than it should. I placed the phone face down on the table. A second message arrived almost immediately. "We need to talk." I closed my eyes. Exhaustion washed over me. Not physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. The kind that settles deep inside your chest after carrying too much for too long. Across the city, Lucas sat inside his office long after the gala ended. The ballroom downstairs had emptied hours ago. Staff cleaned tables. Security completed final checks. Yet the light in his office remained on. Vincent Russo's chief advisor stood near the desk reviewing reports from the evening. Luca barely looked at them. His attention remained elsewhere. "You are still thinking about the girl," Vincent said. Luca did not answer immediately. Finally, he nodded once. "Grace Bennett." Vincent glanced down at a tablet. "Catering manager. 27 years old. Lives in Queens." Luca remained silent. "You want me to look into it?" Vincent asked. Most powerful men enjoyed collecting information. Luca rarely did unless something bothered him. Tonight something clearly did. After a long pause, he spoke. "Something is wrong." Vincent studied him carefully. "Because of what you saw?" Luca looked toward the skyline beyond the windows. "Because of what she did not say." Meanwhile, I spent the next several days trying to convince myself the conversation never happened. Work helped. Long shifts helped. Keeping busy helped. Or at least I thought it did. Then little things started happening. Small things. Strange things. The broken security light outside my apartment building was replaced. The delivery driver who constantly parked across the entrance suddenly stopped appearing. Even the property manager seemed unusually attentive whenever tenants reported problems. Coincidences. That was what I told myself. Coincidences. Yet every time something changed, I found myself thinking about the man sitting behind a desk high above Manhattan. The man who paid attention. The man who saw through lies. And deep down, I had the uncomfortable feeling that Luca Moretti had not forgotten our conversation nearly as easily as I wanted to believe. The strange thing about protection is that you often notice it only after it has already begun. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Life continued moving forward, yet small details kept changing around me. Problems disappeared before they became problems. Deliveries arrived on time. Event schedules suddenly became easier. Clients who normally created endless stress seemed to lose interest in making my days difficult. None of it was dramatic. That was what made it unsettling. One Thursday afternoon, I arrived at a catering venue downtown and discovered that someone had upgraded our entire staff meal service. Better food, better equipment, better working conditions. Everyone celebrated. I stood quietly in the corner wondering why. Later that evening, I received a call from my landlord. For once, it was not about rent. "Good news," he said. "The building security system is finally being replaced." I nearly laughed. The old system had been broken for years. Nobody ever cared enough to fix it. Suddenly, it was being upgraded. Coincidences. More coincidences. That was still the explanation I gave myself. Yet the list kept growing. Then came Friday night. I was finishing inventory at a corporate event when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Normally, I ignored those calls. Something told me to answer this one. Hello. Silence. Then a familiar voice. My entire body tensed immediately. Grace. I closed my eyes. What do you want? The conversation lasted less than a minute. Nothing threatening. Nothing obvious. Yet by the time it ended, my hands were shaking. Some people have a way of making old fears feel new again. I slipped the phone into my bag and focused on breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Across the city, Lucas sat in a conference room reviewing contracts when Vincent entered without knocking. That alone was unusual. Vincent never interrupted meetings. Luca looked up immediately. What happened? Vincent placed a folder on the table. We confirmed it. The room grew quiet. Luca opened the file. Every page deepened the crease forming between his brows. Dates. Reports. Witness statements. Patterns. Nothing criminal. Nothing dramatic enough to attract public attention. Just years of emotional pressure, manipulation, and isolation directed toward one woman who kept pretending everything was fine. Luca closed the folder slowly. How long? Almost 4 years. A dangerous silence followed. Not anger. Something colder. Something more controlled. Vincent recognized it immediately. Luca was not upset because of what he discovered. He was upset because nobody had stepped in sooner. Meanwhile, I left the event just after midnight. Rain had begun falling again. The streets shimmered beneath streetlights. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking toward the subway entrance. Halfway there, I noticed a black umbrella resting beside a bench. Attached was a small card. No signature. No explanation. Just 5 words written in neat handwriting. You do not have to hide. I stared at the message while rain tapped softly against the pavement. Somehow I already knew who had sent it. And for the first time, instead of feeling frightened by Luca Moretti's attention, I felt something far more dangerous. I felt seen. There comes a moment when pretending everything is fine becomes harder than admitting it is not. That moment arrived on a cold Tuesday evening. The sky above Queens was heavy with dark clouds, and the wind pushed fallen leaves across the sidewalk as I locked the door of the bakery supply store where I had spent the afternoon picking up orders. My phone showed 3 missed calls. The same number. The same person. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. For years, guilt had controlled my decisions. Guilt for disappointing people. Guilt for setting boundaries. Guilt for choosing myself. But something had changed over the past few weeks. Maybe it was the conversations with Luca. Maybe it was the realization that somebody finally saw what I had been hiding. Whatever the reason, I no longer felt the same obligation to answer. I slipped the phone back into my purse and started walking. Halfway down the block, the rain began. Small drops at first, then steady. I ducked beneath an awning and watched traffic crawl through the intersection. My thoughts drifted toward the note attached to the umbrella. You do not have to hide. 5 simple words. Yet they lingered in my mind every day since I received them. Across the city, Lucas stood near the windows of his office while Vincent reviewed the latest information. She ignored the calls, Vincent said. Luca nodded once. Relief flashed briefly across his expression. Good. Vincent folded his arms. You cannot solve every problem for her. Luca remained silent. He already knew that. This was never about control. Never about making choices on Grace's behalf. It was about making sure she had choices at all. Back in Queens, I finally reached my apartment building just after 8. The hallway was unusually quiet. Even the flickering light that had annoyed tenants for months had been repaired. I smiled despite myself. Coincidence. That was still the word I used. Yet even I was starting to stop believing it. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and sat at the kitchen table. The silence felt peaceful. Safe. Then my phone rang again. This time, instead of answering, I powered it off completely. The apartment grew still. And for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Real relief. Not temporary. Not borrowed. Genuine. The next morning, everything changed. I arrived at work and found a small envelope waiting on my desk. No return address. No name. Just my first name written neatly across the front. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside was a single card. On the front was a photograph of Manhattan at sunrise. On the back were 8 handwritten words. The strongest people are not the ones who endure. They are the ones who choose better. I read the sentence 3 times. Then a fourth. My eyes stung unexpectedly. Because for the first time, someone was not asking me to survive. Someone was asking me to believe I deserved more. And deep down, a part of me was finally starting to listen. Power is not the ability to make people afraid. Real power is making someone feel safe when the rest of the world has failed them. I did not understand that until the afternoon I saw Luca Moretti stop pretending he was merely a successful businessman. It happened 3 days after I received the card. Work had been unusually busy. A luxury hotel in Midtown needed last-minute catering support for a private event, and my team spent the entire day rushing between kitchens and banquet rooms. By 6 o'clock, my feet ached and my head pounded. I was carrying a stack of inventory sheets through a service corridor when I heard raised voices around the corner. Nothing dangerous, nothing dramatic, just 2 suppliers arguing about a contract delay. Yet the tension in the hallway instantly reminded me of every situation I spent years trying to avoid. I froze for half a second before forcing myself to keep walking. Old habits do not disappear overnight. Fear leaves echoes. Later that evening, I stepped outside for fresh air. The sun was setting behind the skyline, painting the glass towers gold and orange. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then I noticed several black vehicles pulling quietly to the curb near the hotel entrance. Men in dark suits stepped out. Calm, professional, organized. They moved with the kind of discipline that instantly drew attention without creating a scene. Guests stopped talking. Hotel staff straightened their posture. Even the valet attendants seemed more alert. I followed their line of sight and saw Luca emerging from one of the vehicles. He looked exactly as he always did. Impeccable suit, calm expression, controlled movements. Yet something felt different. People reacted to him differently. Not with admiration, not with fear, with respect. Genuine respect. Employees greeted him. Managers hurried forward. Security personnel nodded immediately. The entire environment shifted around him without a single word being spoken. I watched from a distance as he crossed the entrance. Then his eyes found mine. Out of dozens of people standing there, he noticed me immediately. A faint smile appeared. Small, almost invisible. Yet it changed everything. He walked directly toward me. Grace. Hearing my name somehow steadied my nerves. What are you doing here? I asked. Meeting. His answer was typically brief. I laughed softly. You always answer questions with one word. Only when one word works. For the first time in weeks, I genuinely smiled. Luca studied me carefully. You look tired. Most people would have said I looked fine. Luca never seemed interested in pretending. Long day, I admitted. He nodded once. Then one of the hotel executives approached and began discussing business matters. What happened next surprised me. The executive interrupted me twice without realizing it. Before I could react, Luca calmly redirected the conversation and included me in every decision being discussed. It was such a small gesture. Yet nobody had done that for me before. Nobody with that level of influence. Nobody with that level of authority. Standing there beneath the evening sky, surrounded by people who listened whenever Luca spoke, I finally understood something important. His power was real. His influence was enormous. But the reason I trusted him had nothing to do with either of those things. It was because every time he had the opportunity to make me feel smaller, he chose to make me feel seen instead. Sometimes the truth arrives so quietly that you almost miss the moment your life changes. 2 nights after the hotel event, I found myself standing on the rooftop terrace of a luxury building overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly beneath a sky full of stars and distant aircraft lights. A charity fundraiser had just ended, and most of the guests were already leaving. Music drifted faintly from the ballroom below. The cold autumn air felt refreshing against my skin. For the first time in a very long time, I felt calm. Really calm. I leaned against the railing and watched the river reflect thousands of lights. You always disappear when rooms get crowded. The familiar voice made me smile before I even turned around. Luca stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his dark coat moving slightly in the wind. Maybe I like quiet places, I replied. Maybe. His eyes remained on the skyline. Silence settled between us. Comfortable silence. The kind that does not need to be filled. A month earlier, that would have felt impossible. Now it felt natural. Eventually I looked at him. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why me? The question had been living inside my head for weeks. Why had he noticed? Why had he cared? Why had he invested time and energy into someone whose life seemed insignificant compared to his world? Luca remained quiet for several seconds, long enough that I wondered if he planned to answer at all. Then he exhaled slowly. Do you remember the winter storm last year? I frowned. The one that shut down half the city? He nodded. Most of the staff went home early. A memory surfaced. Snow. Traffic chaos. A nearly empty event hall. You stayed. I looked at him with surprise. How do you know that? A faint smile touched his face. Because I was there. I stared at him. Luca continued. An elderly janitor slipped on the loading dock. Everyone was rushing to leave. You stayed with him for 3 hours until his family arrived. The memory returned completely. I had almost forgotten it. That was nothing. No. His voice was firm. It was not. I looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. Luca stepped closer to the railing beside me. Most people are kind when it is convenient. You were kind when nobody was watching. My throat tightened. The city lights blurred slightly. That was one day. There were many days. His gaze found mine. I noticed because people like you are rare. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind carried distant sounds from the streets below. My heart felt strangely unsteady. Not from fear. From something warmer. Something unfamiliar. Luca looked toward the skyline again. The night I saw your wrist, I realized something. I waited. You spent years giving compassion to everyone around you. His voice softened, and nobody seemed interested in giving any back. Emotion rose unexpectedly inside my chest. I blinked hard. Luca noticed, but as always, he did not push. He simply stood beside me beneath the Manhattan sky. And in that moment, I finally understood the truth. He had not stepped into my life because he wanted to save me. He stepped into it because long before I noticed him, he had already decided I mattered. The funny thing about healing is that it rarely arrives all at once. There is no single morning when you wake up and suddenly become a different person. It happens in small moments. Quiet moments. The kind you almost overlook until one day you realize your life no longer feels the same. 3 months later, I stood inside a bright new bakery on a corner street in Queens, adjusting a display of fresh pastries while sunlight poured through the front windows. The scent of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. Customers chatted near the register. A little girl pressed her hands against the glass case while trying to choose between a muffin and a cupcake. It was ordinary, wonderfully ordinary, and that was exactly why I loved it. The bakery had started as a dream I never believed would become real. A dream I always pushed aside because survival seemed more important than hope. Yet somehow hope found its way back. One careful step at a time. One decision at a time. One act of courage at a time. The bell above the front door chimed softly. I looked up and smiled immediately. Luca entered wearing a dark coat and the same calm expression he always carried. Some things never changed. The customers recognized him. A few whispered. A few stared. None of it seemed to matter to him. His attention settled on me the moment he walked inside. Just as it always did. You are late, I said. One corner of his mouth lifted. 2 minutes. That is still late. I will try to recover from this devastating criticism. I laughed. The sound came easily now. That was another thing that had changed. Luca approached the counter and glanced around the bakery. Pride flickered briefly across his face. Not because of the business itself. Because he knew what it represented. Independence. Confidence. A future I chose for myself. Busy morning, he asked. Very. I handed him a cup of coffee. And I am not complaining. He accepted it with a nod. For a moment, we simply stood there watching the sunlight move across the floor. Outside, people hurried through their daily routines. Inside, everything felt peaceful, safe, real. Finally, I looked at him. Do you remember the first thing you asked me? His eyes softened immediately. Of course he remembered. Neither of us would ever forget. I smiled. I hated that question. I know. I wanted to leave. I know that too. I shook my head. And yet it changed everything. Luca remained quiet for several seconds before answering. No. I frowned. No. He met my gaze. Steady. Certain. You changed everything. Emotion tightened my throat. Because deep down, I knew he was right. He had opened a door. He had offered support. He had reminded me that I mattered. But I was the one who eventually stepped forward. I was the one who chose a different future. Luca reached for my hand. His grip was warm and familiar. Outside, the city continued rushing through another ordinary day. Inside the bakery, sunlight danced across the windows, and laughter drifted through the air. Looking back now, I sometimes think about the moment a powerful man noticed what everyone else overlooked and asked a question nobody else dared to ask. He saw pain where others saw silence. He saw worth where I saw doubt. And because of that, I learned the most important lesson of all. The people who truly care about you do not rescue you. They remind you that you were strong enough to save yourself all along.